Hello and welcome to this video. Some of you may well know, if you've been following me, that I've been having trouble with my Rega Apollo CD player. I put a video on a few months ago now. I had trouble with discs not initializing and all kinds of funny jumps and skips and things like that weren't caused due to dirty discs. Because some of them were brand new and all discs were doing it rather than just the odd one. And then they stopped initializing altogether, and I got some help from my friend Ashley Cox, who some of you will know from Twitter, and he helped me clean the lens, kind of like over kick or something or other like that, and it worked for a time, although there were still specific tracks that it wouldn't track properly. But then it kind of dwindled completely to a halt, and now it only plays something like for about a minute or something before it just stops altogether. So I assume it has something wrong with the transport, which would be quite a lot of money to have fixed. I did inquire at Audio T, and probably not what I would get for it if I sold it on eBay. If I sold it on eBay as broken, many people probably would be put off because it's the transport bit that's broken, and those people that buy things to get parts from it would be trying to salvage a transport from it, and they're not going to want one with a broken transport. So I have a dead dodo of an Apollo on my hands unless someone really wants it. Okay, for other parts or the casing or something rather than the transport, and if you do, then let me know. So yeah, I scrimped and saved, and I also found an ex-demo heavily discounted Apollo R. This is the Apollo R. It's the newer update of the Apollo. The original Apollo I got was a full-size item. The Apollo R is about half size. Unfortunately, I can't show it to you from here because I'm just using the FaceTime camera on my Mac. I might try and put a little photo of it on there just to quickly just show you and to show you it, but I don't know. Depends how long this video gets. So yeah, I found it heavily discounted, ex-demo version, and Audio T are actually extremely good. And they have a bit on their website where if there's a product at another store that's not local to you, they will have it sent to the store that is local enough to you. And what they'll do is they will put it by, they'll contact you, they'll arrange to take a deposit from you, and then when you're ready to actually go and complete the purchase, then you pay the rest. So I opted for that, okay, and as I say, it was heavily discounted, which was very nice. So yeah, impressions, okay. Now I only got the Apollo R yesterday, so it's probably in a warming up period. Now, there is received hi-fi wisdom that says that all hi-fi products will take a while to come on song and sound their best. I've not necessarily found that to be entirely true. It's certainly true of speakers. When I got my R3s many years ago, they actually said on the speaker boxes, there was even a big notice there saying, don't expect these to sound brilliant the minute that you plug them in. You know, you've got to give them a bit of time to bed in, because the cones themselves, because of the kind of flexible material that they're made from, they actually need time to bed in. Certainly, putting the Apollo R on straight out of the box, it does sound absolutely brilliant, okay. And I'll come on to that a bit later, because really I ought to talk about the appearance and other things first of all. It certainly feels a lot more solid than the original Apollo. Okay, I don't know whether or not that's just because it's half size and it feels very heavy for something that is the size that it is. I suppose, you know, in certain ways it's a bit like an iPhone or something like that. You know, it's a tiny thing, but it's got chunk and it's got heft to it. You know, it really does feel like you're buying a solid product. Okay, the things that are not quite so solid is the remote. Now the R in Apollo R actually stands for remote, but I don't quite understand why, because the original one came with a remote control. I think it was an optional extra or something like that, and my one had one, so they charged me an extra 25 quid on my original Apollo purchase. Okay, this is the original remote control that came with my old Apollo then. Okay, it's a bit plasticky feeling, but what it does have on it is a little number pad here, which means that you can actually directly type in the number of the track that you want. So if you're on track 2 and you want to play track 6, then you just type in 6 and it will play it. Okay. The new one feels slightly less hefty, and it's a little bit more spongy and rubbery. It doesn't feel like an entirely quality product here. Most remote controls don't really. Doesn't have that numeric keypad on it. So if you're on track 2 and you want to play track 6, you've got to, you know, press through the right number of times on the button, which might not necessarily be what you want to do. But I'm not really a person who gives a monkeys about remote controls anyway, people, because where I kind of sit, as it were, when I'm being a couch potato, I'm not in direct line of fire with the product, and therefore I can't actually, you know, I might as well just get up and do it, because you know, it just won't work really. And you know, for me, I'm a bit of a music purist. When I put music on, I don't like to just play one track off an album. I'm an album person. I play an album because I'm in the mood for an album, and therefore I start at track 1 and finish at track 10 or whatever. Okay, when it's finished. Okay, and if I don't have time to listen to the album, then I won't listen to it. Okay. So I suppose that's just the kind of user I am, and I very rarely use, in fact I virtually never use anything like programming shuffles or anything like that, because, you know, for me a good pop star or good musician or whatever has programmed or has placed the songs in the appropriate order that they should be played in. Okay, and therefore you shouldn't really need to shuffle all the tracks around, okay, or play them in a different order or whatever. Okay, so coming on to the sounds then, as I said, it does sound very good coming out of the box, and on the way home I was deliberating as to what the first album was that I should play on there. I was toying with playing Agnetta's A, but at the moment my CDs are slightly disorganised and I can't find it. So I just found a pile of CDs and picked the first one up, which happens to be a fairly new one that I've bought, which is Lisa Stansfield's 7 album. Okay, this is an absolutely brilliant album, people. Okay, those of you who remember her from the 90s, the sound isn't quite so different. Okay, there's something immediately recognisable about it. Okay, and as I say, my old CD player was in a bit of a state when I first got this CD, and some tracks wouldn't play very well. But I know enough to be able to say that there's a certain amount of more guts to the new Apollo R. Okay, now as a base spec CD player, okay, and you know, I am talking hundreds of pounds here as opposed to you know, just, you know, a few quid, and therefore it might sound a bit obnoxious for me to say that it's cheap, but it is. In the world of hi-fi, it is cheap. Okay, and as base spec CD players go, the old Apollo sounded so good that in order to get anything that significantly bettered it, you would have to be paying double, or perhaps even more than double the price. Okay, there's certainly at the time nothing came close to it. Okay, and you know, I listened to Name Gear as well as, you know, as well as Rega gear. Plus I had an old Mira3 CD player once upon a time as well, which was like half the price of the Planet and the Apollo and whatever. Because I had a Planet as well. That was the first ever CD player that Rega made. It was called the Rega Planet. Then came the Apollo, and then came the Apollo R in that order. Okay, so I can sort of reference the sound of this CD player also from the sound of the Planet and the old Apollo. Okay, but going from this album, on the old Apollo was snappy, it was danceable, but the new Apollo R, although you weren't aware of anything missing on the old Apollo, the new Apollo R has a certain amount of guts and heft, and it's been described in reviews as solidity. Okay, a really solid feeling that the musicians are kind of there in front of you. Okay, Lisa Stansfield's voice itself on here was a bit more convincing, a bit more emotional compared to the old Apollo. Okay, because the Planet had, you know, with the first Planet, it sounded quite emotional, not particularly detailed. More kind of homogeneous. Okay, the Apollo sounded slightly more clinical, but more detailed. Okay, slightly less emotional. Okay, whereas with this thing, the new Apollo R, it's a bit more like the ISIS experience that I talked about a couple of years ago now, when I went to hear the new, as it was then, the new Rega Isis and Osiris, which were their top-notch £6,000 a piece CD and amplifier thing that I could only dream about. Okay, and I'll probably never get in this lifetime. Okay, so yeah, I mean, when I listened to the ISIS, I was aware of performers that were right in front of me. And you know, you could detect things like, you know, the actual size of the performer. Okay, and you know that they actually had sort of a certain amount of three-dimensionality to them. Okay, and here, it's not quite the same. You're not getting quite the same amount of three-dimensionality to the performance, but it's certainly unravelling more detail, and it certainly has a bit more guts and presence than the original Apollo. Okay, something, you know, the guts and presence was kind of there without quite so much of the detail with the Planet. Okay, but yeah, that probably makes as much sense as whatever. Okay, so I played that album from start to finish, and you know, absolutely enthralling, absolutely entertaining. It's got some live tracks at the end, and you know, even just hearing Lisa Stansfield say "You're great, you're all great," and you know, it was just there in front of you. You know, on the studio recordings, there's a slight amount of compression that's been applied to the backing mix, and the voice though is just sort of, I don't know, spreading right out in front of you. You know, you can imagine, you know, her mouth actually being open, and you know, whether or not she's doing this or whether she's doing this. You know, it just, you know, I'm being silly, but you know, you were aware of her facial features, her mouth opening and closing and actually singing to you. Okay, the next album I put on, I don't actually think I have in front of me. Yes, I do. Okay, Love Sexy by Prince. Okay, now I do have this on vinyl. Okay, and the impression that I always had of Prince's 80s albums was that they sounded, or even though people were trying to get rid of them at the time and trying to sort of convince you that CDs were, you know, the major thing here, the vinyl ones always had a certain amount of openness and kick and presence and punch to them, okay? And I'm happy to say, in a way, because you know, it kind of confirms what I've always thought, really, that that's the same is really true, okay? On the Apollo here, compared to this album here, which is a modern mastering, okay, and it's actually done quite well, okay? I'll talk about some bad mastering that perhaps in another video, okay, because this is going on for a bit now. But this album, okay, it took a bit of time to acclimatise to it after this, because you would expect it to be up and punchy and whatever, okay? It is on the vinyl, it's not on the CD, okay? It's probably more to do with the mastering than anything. You know, at this time CDs were still quite new, and people were just a little bit sort of scared of making, you know, anything that approached that 0 decibel kind of march. But it has rhythm in spades, and once you're used to the fact that it's not quite so punchy, it's very detailed, okay? It's just not as entertaining and as live and vibrant as the album, okay? Buy the vinyl, okay, and play it on a decent vinyl thing. So after that, I then thought, right, well, let's just have a quick sort of, you know, hiatus for a bit, you know, leave the CDs alone for a bit and just go back to vinyl and just, you know, see what vinyl sounded like. So I played an old Elvis Presley album that I have. It's one of those 20 greatest hits things that they released in the 70s and 80s. Yeah, these were sort of, I suppose, later Elvis Presley performances. There, you know, tended to be a lot of stereo numbers there. The first one is his version of Fever, okay? And I have to say that despite what I've said about you know, the brilliant qualities of this CD player so far, and it is brilliant, okay? It really is brilliant, but what it doesn't do is still what vinyl does, okay? Particularly analogly recorded vinyl, if there's such a word as analogly. It's with Fever, you're aware of somebody standing up, plucking a double bass, boom, 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 real snapping fingers, okay, a proper shaker that is played at, I wonder whether or not it was even supposed to be there. I wonder whether or not someone had kind of like used the shaker as a guide, and then kind of when they recorded over it, it didn't quite disappear, as it were. But it comes in just a few odd places, but it's there. And you've got Elvis Presley, Elvis Presley's voice. You can envisage the chamber that he is in, and you can envisage him standing there. You can get all his facial features. Okay, it was a bit like when I first put Michael Jackson on, when I first got my 1042 cartridge, and you know, the first thing I did was just up and moonwalking, and you know, I'm standing there looking like a blithering idiot. Anyone who saw me through my front window listening to Elvis Presley would have seen me sort of putting on the Elvis Presley look, you know. I'm gonna do that one again because I think you deserve me, you know, all this kind of stuff. And you know, there you are, and it's just so present and so there. When he sang, what is it? Are You Lonesome Tonight? And you know, the guitars there just had so much room about them to breathe. Okay. There is a sense, particularly, and I'll say why in the next video I make, because I am going to talk about a couple of mastering things. But there's still, with digital replay, there is still a kind of like lid, okay, which is put on. It just feels like it's not quite out of the box, okay. Vinyl really just throws the performance in front of you. There's no constraints there. You know, the musicians are fully present, okay? Whereas, you know, particularly like this, you see, when I sat down over there and listening to the speakers over there, the performance seemed more distant from you. It was kind of, solid. Okay, you had an awareness of all the performers being there, but they were miles away. Okay, with the Elvis, okay, he was there. He was in your room, but he wasn't right in your face. Okay, and that's absolutely crucial for kind of the comments that I'm going to make. So then I went back to listen to CDs. This was one of the CDs I took when I went to have a listen to the Isis and Osiris. Okay, and I thought that it would be really productive to have a proper listen to this on my new Apollo R, just to see how close to the Isis it got, and yet it does. It's this one is actually fairly well mastered. Okay, her one before it, the blues album that she made, was absolutely dire. Into the Blues it's called, and it's I can't listen to it because it's so badly mastered. This one I was a bit skeptical about buying because I thought, oh no, is the mastering going to be as bad? But actually it isn't, and it's relatively tame compared to that. And like the Elvis Presley that I was listening to, most of the tracks on there's not thousands of instruments, so you can actually explore physically the space that's there. Okay, still got a tiny bit of a lid on it, but it's it's not quite as pronounced as this album. But I think that's the mastering. Okay, in terms of the actual Apollo sound, yeah, it's absolutely enthralling, and although the old Apollo was brilliant, it's definitely a step up. You're definitely getting more of a sense of these performers being there, more detail. Okay, you notice bits that you didn't kind of like hear before. Now, not in front of me, but if you'll excuse me for a second, I'll go and grab another album I played. It's this one here, Solitude Standing by Suzanne Vega. Okay, because this is an 80s mastering. Okay, I'm not aware of it actually having been remastered since, which is a good thing really, because this is actually quite a good mastering. Again, like this album, where's it gone? Yeah, Love Sexy. Comes from roughly the same sort of period, and people were a bit more cautious in, as I say, in their mastering techniques then. But this album here, it was almost in a sense of like listening to a different album. Okay, her a cappella Tom's Diner, which is how this starts, had far more of a kind of presence, and I keep saying this word presence, but it's really there. You can feel her licking her lips. It's absolutely tangible that you can almost touch it. Okay, yeah, part of it's down to the mastering, but most definitely the Apollo reveals far more. The Apollo R, sorry, reveals far more of the master than the old Apollo does. Okay, good though the old Apollo is. Okay, one of the songs on here that really caught my attention is called Ironbound Fancy Poultry, and it sort of changes towards the end. It's starts out in 4/4 time, and then it kind of moves on to a more triplety 12/8 kind of feel. Okay, which you were kind of aware of on the Apollo, but the Apollo R, suddenly you're hearing dun 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 dun, dun as the rhythm is far tighter and far more there. It really is rhythmically on the pace more than the Apollo, possibly as much as the Planet. Okay, another album which I played yesterday, which I don't have here, and if you'll bear with me, I'll go and get it. Here we go. Elliot Smith, my poor neighbours, who must have just been going nuts last night. I played CDs and albums for about 6 hours non-stop. But yeah, this album here, Either Or, okay, which I took with me when I first auditioned The Planet way back in 1998 or something. Okay, and when I took it, when I got The Planet home, I used to have a very long and tiny music room to play in, as it were, all those years ago. And I remember having this Mira3 CD player to trade in, and I thought, you know, what you know, what difference is there really going to be? I think this was the first one I played, and I'm thinking, you know, will I even be able to hear it in my room? And then suddenly, you know, by you know, a couple of tracks in, I was absolutely hooked, and like, yeah, you know, it really is. It's chalk and cheese. You know, a bread and butter sort of entry level minus, you know, one CD player like the old Mira3 thing, compared to this, you know, the Rega Planet. You know, it's absolutely beguiling. Okay. And I've always, you know, come back to this album. It's wonderful, and I absolutely played it and played it and played it to death. And I put it on last night, and then, you know, all of a sudden I'm just transported back to the 90s, back to Good Will Hunting, which is where, you know, this album formed part of the soundtrack to Good Will Hunting. And, you know, in particular, you know, tracks that absolutely made sense. There's one on here called 2:45 AM. Okay. And you can hear him licking his lips. There is something absolutely toe tapping about it. Okay, it's one of those tracks that starts out as acoustic and then comes in full band, you know, with, you know, your distorted guitars and what have you. Okay, and that can be a kind of a bit of a noise, and it can kind of lead to some tension, because you're thinking, oh my god, you know, what are the neighbours going to think when this whole thing comes in? But there's, but, you know, suddenly this thing just comes to life, and you know, the way that the music, and I'm sure it was recorded on an old 4-track tape recorder. You know, there's something delightfully lo-fi about this, but, you know, suddenly the Apollo R is making absolute sense of it, because all the acoustic parts, you know, you have far more sense of the rhythm and the pace of it all. You know, it's absolutely starting and stopping on the beat, and then all of a sudden, when it does come in with the full with the full band, it's there, it's expected, it's not a surprise, it's not something that is going to make you go like this, you know. Another album that's actually good for that, which I haven't played yet on my new player, is Damien Rice's O album, which, you know, again, you know, has these amazing lows but huge highs on it. Okay, and I'll have to check that out. But yeah, this album then, I was just thoroughly amazed at it. You know, absolutely, it's just gobsmacking. Okay, and the last one I'm going to talk about in this video, because I'm going to make another one about, which is really a mastering comments kind of video, but this thing here, Cooler Shaker, Peasants, Pigs and Astronauts. I absolutely adore this album. This is the remastered version of it. And, you know, it's one of those remasters that you actually don't mind that it's been remastered. For me, my old CD is a bit battered now, and I just like playing this because, you know, it's in better condition, it's a nicer box and that sort of thing. It's just, it's got one bonus track on it, but the mastering has been done very sensitively, and I was aware of far more dynamic range. This is an album, I think I put a video on YouTube, in fact I did put a video on YouTube talking about mastering, and I compared it to one of Benny Anderson Orchestra's ones, I think, that was you know, a mastering from about the same time, and you know, the differences in philosophies between the two of them. But but yeah, this is gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. Great Hosanna. The guitars at the beginning during the build-up, you know, although the holistically, like the whole volume builds up from that up to that. You've actually got like micro dynamics where guitars are actually fading in and coming out and getting louder and getting softer again. Okay, I played Sound of Drums at the ISIS demonstration simply because in the old room that I had in my last house for playing music in, I was aware of bass resonances and how particularly in Sound of Drums, for example, you know, the bass was overpowering and it didn't have the kind of clarity and stuff. And then when I went down to Audio T and played the Isis and Osiris and played Sound of Drums on that, suddenly I was aware of dum 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 instead of a, you know, the bass actually starting and stopping. Instead, it sounded far more kind of boom, and you know, and just because I was getting bass resonances in the room I was in, and as I said earlier at the time, I changed the cable and it kind of did more about it than that. But here, the bass was absolutely on the money. Okay, when I listened to the Isis during the instrumental, there was I think it comes at the point of an edit. It does actually sound a bit like they'd spliced two takes together at this point and they'd done something to kind of conceal the edit. And what they did was took a guitar string and went pew down it, okay? Which it had never come to my consciousness at all until I heard it on the Isis. Okay, and then when I got that new cabling and stuff, I just listened out for it all the time, and then suddenly the Apollo R that's in my room now, and you know I'm kind of waffling and whatever, but the Apollo R suddenly again brought this pew out, you know, and you know it's just little details like that, you know, and you just. You know, you're just not aware of them, okay? So, you know, I hope that my Apollo R will, you know, although my old Apollo lasted 8 years without, you know, major things going wrong with it or anything like that, I hope my Apollo R is more reliable. It does seem like I'm not the only one who's had transport issues with the Apollo, and I hope that, you know, Rega has sorted it out with the Apollo R, and you know, hopefully it'll last a bit longer. I did listen to other stuff last night as well, but there are a couple of albums which I want to talk about in a little bit more detail, not because of the Apollo R, but because of their mastering. Okay, and I will do that perhaps in another video. Okay, thank you for listening, and I hope that. That you enjoyed it, and I'll have to get that phone. All right, see you later. Bye.